All right, guys, today we're going to be talking about a Death Knight wish list, and I want to start things off by saying I am not a game developer. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I have been playing Death Knight for the past 15 years, and I do have some feedback on things that I think are going well and things that I think could be improved upon. When I'm talking about things that I think can be improved upon, I want to make sure I'm offering some solutions here, so it's not just a video of complaining. So we're going to go through each specialization on things that are going well, things that are maybe not going so well, and just like Blizzard, at the very, very end, we'll talk about PvP. Let's get started. Alright, so first we're going to talk about Death Knight as a whole, and Death Knight as a whole has two major problems that need to be addressed. Number one is, you guessed it, Death and Decay. Death and Decay is an iconic ability that Blizzard came out with a very long time ago, and people are very nostalgic about Death Knight. So Blizzard historically has not been the best at updating visuals or changing iconic abilities. Death Knight's Death and Decay, however, is a bit outdated because as dungeons evolve, as raids evolve, and you need to dodge swirls and lines on the ground, there's a lot of movement, and Death and Decay kind of locks you in one place. Ret Paladin got a bit of a rework to this, where Consecration is procced, and it's just dropped whenever. So when they need to move, it's totally fine. They don't really mind moving out of it, because they know they're just going to get another one. I think some solutions here, from my perspective, are to give a sort of an aura around Death and Decay. So as the Death Knight moves around, Death and Decay will follow them. We see this, we have the technology, because one of Death Knight's minions with Rider of the Apocalypse actually has this. So that would be one solution to this problem. Another potential solution would be to bake this sort of cleave into Death Knight's abilities that it already has. Death and Decay is not a fun button to press. It's not a button that you press and you feel excited to press it. So baking this into just the standard rotation would be really nice. Things like Remorseless Winter for Frost, I think would be really interesting if this sort of cleaved, but those are two potential solutions. So let's talk about the second major problem with Death Knight, and this is the fact that Death Knight is the only class without access to a raid buff. Now, Blizzard has talked about this, and they've sort of said that Death Grip is viewed in their minds as a raid buff. However, the problem with this is that this is really dependent on raid design, on whether or not the group gets value out of this. Some raids, there are ads that need to be gripped. An example of this is Brood Twister in the last tier, and Death Knight was essentially mandatory. This tool was mandatory for that fight. And then we have fights now that the group doesn't get any value out of this. Either the ads are ungrippable, or there are no ads to begin with. So I think Blizzard needs to start looking at Death Grip as more of a utility tool, like a Warlock Gate, or something of that nature, rather than an actual raid buff. So again, we're going to offer some solutions. Two potential solutions to this are, one, Blizzard originally had a raid buff in mind for Death Knight that got scrapped, and that was a leech buff. I think this would be fantastic. I think it's really thematic, sort of leeching from your enemies. And the second one is an opposite of Hunter's Mark. So if you're familiar with Hunter's Mark, it gets placed on a target, and everyone deals extra damage to that target at a certain threshold of health. However, Death Knights could be a bit of an opposite, where when a target gets very low in execute range, it would increase everyone's damage to that target, which I also think would be really neat and thematic. These are just two possible solutions, but I think that at its core, Blizzard needs to look at Death Grip as a utility tool rather than a raid buff, so that they're not so beholden to the design of dungeons and raids. Alright guys, and the first specialization that I want to talk about is Unholy. And Unholy is a specialization that has a bit of a spec identity issue. It tries really hard to be two different specializations at the same time, and in my opinion, it ends up coming short on both. So On the left-hand side of the tree, we have sort of this damage over time, disease, AoE sort of spec, and then on the right-hand side of the tree, we have this sort of single target minion spec. And the problem with this is that whether you're choosing the disease build or the pet build, you're really only getting half of a specialization of flavor. And the big problem for me is that there's not a whole lot of overlap between these. It's not a whole lot of interaction between your diseases and your pets that make it viable to sort of mix and match these options. An example of this is right now in the Mythic Plus build, you don't even take any of the the iconic pet talents like Apocalypse or Army of the Dead, Raise Abomination, and it's not because those aren't competitive, it's just because they have no synergy with the disease build. And so I think that one of the things Unholy really needs to work on is making sure that there is a bridge. There are more interactions between the diseases and the pets so that you really have more build diversity in your fights. And you're not sort of sacrificing all of your single target and that fantasy with all of your disease and AoE fantasy. And so an example of this is the capstone in the middle, Unholy Assault. This is just a 20% damage increase. I think that as a capstone between the disease build and the pet build, I think that this should be something that links them together so that there is sort of value between the two. I could see that they tried this a little bit with decomposition. The problem with this is that they sort of added this talent and it was very undertuned and they just never addressed it. So I think going back and doing another sweep at the talent tree with some of these dead talents that no one's ever taking, like Ruptured Viscera, would be a great example. And something that I would like to mention, just as an honorable mention as a potential solution, is more things like this. Reanimation is a PvP talent where it could be used in an AoE situation. And so let me show you what it looks like. I think this would do well in just a standard tree. Use it, and a zombie comes shambling forward, and it blows up doing AoE damage. That's really thematic, and I think something along those lines, where it's thematic with a pet, maybe that pet spreads diseases, I think that would be really neat, and that would sort of bridge the gap a bit. Something else that I want to talk about for Unholy is Festering Wounds. Guys, look, there's been a lot of band-aid solutions with Festering Wounds. We have talents like Infected Claws, we have talents like Pestilence to sort of make wounds passively generate, but the problem at this point is that they're not fun, they're not engaging. They're essentially old combo points tied to each target, and no matter how passively they're applied, they're not fun to blow up, they're not fun to capitalize on, they're not fun to track. And you know, I know a lot of people like the complexity with Unholy compared to, say, Frost, but this needs to go. It's very outdated, it's very clunky. I think that there's a lot of other things that could replace this, such as, you know, instead of pressing Festering Strike, you had some minion that you could summon, as I just showed with Reanimation, that could spread something. It's not a fun ability to press. I'm never happy to press Festering Strike. And as a game, you want to be happy pressing your buttons, you want to feel like it's impactful. Doesn't feel like the reward is worth it. That is something that I would completely go and remove entirely. Alright guys, and now let's talk about Frost. So Frost has a bit of the opposite issue of Unholy. Unholy is forced to sort of choose between AoE or single target. And it loses a lot of its value in the fact that there's no overlap. There's not much overlap between them. You're making a lot of sacrifices making that choice. Frost, on the other hand, does not have to make any choices for its AoE and its single target. You can safely run this build into every raid, every dungeon, every boss fight, and be okay. There's value in this because of the beginning of a tier. That AoE cleave damage on the adds is really important while still maintaining single target damage. But what ends up happening is as people get gear and numbers go up, adds sort of die more passively, and that cleave becomes less important and the single target damage matters a lot more. We see this with other specializations with similar problems, like Havoc Demon Hunter, where they kind of fall in popularity because, you know, they sort of struggle with single target compared to their single target mixed with cleave. And so Frost runs into this sort of issue where it's not really making a meaningful choice. I will say, fantasy-wise, you guys nailed it, Blizzard. Deathbringer, 10 out of 10. It's fantastic for the design. I love what you're doing. I love the feel of Frost. I love the fact that you get these obliterate procs where you have these big, huge overhead strikes shooting out glacial advances. It's so cool. It's so thematic. It matches perfectly where Unholy is sort of this hybrid melee ranged. And then with Frost, on the other hand, you're just going in there and starting to smash stuff with big overhead strikes. I love it. What I will say though is I would like a bit more choice. Look, we have these two capstones, I think, are the biggest culprit. These capstones, you really never want to swap off of. They're fantastic. They feel fantastic. Now, the big problem is that essentially your choice here comes down to what is going to do more damage, Shattering Frost or Breath of Sindragosa, because they are both single target and AoE damage amplifiers. So at the end of the day, you just pick whichever one is tuned better. I would like it if one of these capstones was focused more on single target, one of these capstones was focused more on AoE. Now, I personally, and this is going to be an opinion thing, okay? So don't freak out. I personally do not like Breath of Sindragosa. I love Shattering Frost. This build with Deathbringer, I think it's an amazing feedback loop. It's super simple, it's super straightforward, it's really fun. There's cool effects flying everywhere. It is the closest that you get to Wrecked Paladin gameplay without being a Ret Paladin. For Death Knight, it's very fun. Breath of Sindragosa, I think, makes your rotation a little more boring. I don't like it. It's been around forever. I personally think that it's holding Frost back a little bit in the fact that it's usually balanced around this. My personal opinion, I think this needs to be replaced with something more engaging, something more fun. You know, maybe have your Frostworm land and you have some interaction with that. I don't know, but I don't like that. I don't like it at all. Some other things I'd like to add just while we're here are things like Horn of Winter, Cold Heart need to be addressed. I mean, these things are consistently underplayed. Horn of Winter gets used with Breath of Sindragosa sometimes. Glacial Advance you never really use anymore because you already get one every time you press Killing Machine. Things like Frost Scythe, Runic Command you don't use on Unholy either. It's kind of a dead talent. I like the addition of Cryogenic Chamber, but some of these sort of dead talents I think can be replaced with something a little more interesting. And like I said, we need to do something about these capstones to sort of differentiate the AoE and single target, so it doesn't just come down to a tuning issue. Alright, and last but not least, before we talk about PvP, is going to be Blood Death Knight. Now, Blood, the rotation is fantastic. Everything about Blood is fantastic, except for some of the talent accessibility and dead talents in the tree. The core rotation is great. The feedback loop of healing yourself, and I love it. I love everything about it. I love the agency that you have as Blood to stay alive and sustain yourself. You're not relying on a healer like other specs may be. It's very, very unique, and I hope that never changes. Now, as far as some of the talents go, there's not a whole lot of build diversity. These are sort of similar to Frost, the talents that you're going to run every single time. And I think that some of the problems here are that we have a lot of talents that are sort of maybe could be baseline, right? Stuff like Heartbreaker could be baseline. I mean, we have stuff like Shattering Bone, which is so far down here, and Bone Storm that you would just never play without. Some of these talents are just extremely required. They're not a talent choice. their talent requirements. And we have other ones like Relish in Blood, Bloodied Blade, Bloodworms, Blood Tap, Leeching Strikes. I mean, Blood Feast that we're just never ever using. I mean, there's never a reason to swap to those, given how powerful some of the other talents are, and some of the options with how you have to go down the tree. Another example of this is Gorfine's Grasp. So, Blizzard, if you're ever wondering why Vengeance Demon Hunter is consistently an amazing tank, maybe except for half a season at a time or something like that, it is because it has access to so much control. Look, Gorfine's Grasp and Tightening Grasp, you're taking multiple talent points to get value out of this, and you're having to give up a lot for it. A lot of people cite that Blood Decay has trouble the higher it gets because, it's just going to eventually hit a wall where it's getting hit for its entire health bar, which is partially true and partially not. You have to use defensives and, sort of manage your cooldowns. But I think that adding some control here, allowing Death Knight easier access to some of these control talents would make a huge difference, because then you're not as worried about getting hit in that moment. And especially having access to a silence would be easy access to a silence would be essential for Death Knight, because it heals based on the damage that it's taking. It would really, really, really like all the ads meleeing it to get value in Death Strike. So I think that having this be more easily accessible would be great, and replacing some of these dead talents. All right, and for PvP, we're finally here, guys. If you've been looking for the PvP section, here it is. We're going to talk first about Unholy. And Unholy has this issue where its win condition is just doing more damage than everyone else, and rotting them down over time to the point where they can't keep up. This is a pretty good win condition in a vacuum, right? Because eventually you just want your damage ramping, and the healer can't out-heal it because of dampening, and people just fall over. That's sort of the goal of Unholy in PvP. Now, the two problems with this are that, one, Unholy needs incredible damage in order to do this, because it does not have access to a Mortal Strike. So if you get in a solo shuffle lobby and you don't have a Mortal Strike on your team, you have to just do an incredible amount of damage in order to secure those kills. And people end up posting the details and saying, oh, Unholy is insane, it's doing all this crazy damage, because they don't understand fundamentally what it has to do to achieve a win. On the other side, all of Unholy's major defenses, as far as Death Strike, as far as Anti-Magic Shell, all that sort of stuff, are affected by dampening. So what this means is that for a specialization that wants to survive into dampening to rot down the enemy team, it doesn't do well in dampening. So it's put in this position where it is not really a burst class, unless you run it. There's some burst builds, but Unholy as a whole typically wants to live into dampening and just rot people down. I think that they've added some sort of solutions to this, like Bloodforged Armor, which, candidly, Blizzard, we've got to talk about this. Bloodforged Armor sounds really good, and it is good. It reduces all physical damage taken by 25% for 4 seconds. Now, the problem with this is that what was Unholy's win condition? Doing obscene amounts of damage so that it can live into dampening and rot people down. When you are spending all of your runic power on Death Strike to maintain a shield, you're not doing that damage. So you are just losing slowly. I think that, Unholy has suffered from a lot of negative PvP modifiers, and they've just sort of been added and never touched. And I think some of this stuff needs to get addressed along with its passive defensive kit. An example of this, Necrotic Wounds no longer heals. And I know that healing is affected by dampening as well, but just as an example, some of those survivability changes are just, it's just nerfed and then forgotten about. And we had a season recently where Unholy and Frost were doing so poorly that Blood was the best specialization in Arena. We saw Blood get played in AWC, not because it was great, but because Frost and Unholy were just that bad. We've seen some buffs to the damage, but this sort of moved Unholy and Frost from like F tier to like D tier, and I would really like to see some buffs to passive defense so that it can do what it was intended to do, which is live into dampening and rot people down. Now, some of the other PvP modifiers that were added, we've seen a lot of the pet builds get buffed in PvP, but the problem is things like Apocalypse or Army of the Dead, some of the most iconic abilities for this specialization, have 50% PvP modifiers on them. They only summon half of the ghouls in PvP. So if we keep buffing the pet builds, but we're not addressing some of these negative PvP modifiers, it's just left in this weird situation where it's trying to choose the talents that are the least nerfed in PvP and hoping that Blizzard somehow remembers them. Alright, and finally we have Frost PvP. Now, Frost, Blizzard, I'm going to be really brutally honest with you here. I have no idea what you were thinking with this talent, okay? I know I've tried to be really fair and sort of offer solutions and all of that with this video. We need to be really brutally honest here. This is bad design. This is bad. And I'm going to explain exactly why it is bad for Frost. So, we take Pillar of Frost, which is a 1 minute cooldown. We talent into Ice Cap, which reduces Pillar of Frost cooldown by 15 seconds. And then we talent into a PvP talent, which increases its cooldown by another 15 seconds. So we are taking 2 extra cooldowns just to give it the original cooldown that it started with. On top of that, that's not the only downside to this talent. It makes you very slowly walk when it is casted. So on top of, increasing your cooldown, where most specializations in the game are dealing their damage on a 45-second timer, you don't synergize with those specs anymore because yours is now on a minute, and everyone else is just able to walk away. So, look, Frost has been, in PvP for a very long time, a hit-and-run specialization, and people have hated that. Because Frost has a fantastic gameplay loop. It feels great to press big Frost Strikes and big Obliterates and stay in the fight and grip people to you, and they're trying to get away, but you're chasing them down. It feels very fun. It has a great rotation, and that's why people love it in PvE. In PvP, you are very weak for all of the reasons that we already talked about. You don't deal damage at range like Unholy does, and you don't have the same level of survivability as other plate classes. You're exceptionally weak into physical damage, and your sustained damage isn't good enough that it's worth staying in the fight and trading with any other specialization in the game. If you stay in the fight and hit someone outside of cooldowns, and they hit you without cooldowns, they're going to do more damage than you. So what this means is that the best course of action for you is just to run away and wait until your cooldowns are back up. You're essentially a sub-rogue without stealth. And for a spec with such a cool, enjoyable rotation and core kit, it's really demoralizing to, play this game of Tom and Jerry. And we've been asking forever, as Frost PvPers, to change this, to buff the sustained damage of Frost so it can stay in the fight. And we got close. Deathbringer was a great addition. However, the problem with Deathbringer is not just the fact that Rider is tuned better, and that Reaper's Mark doesn't hit very hard in PvP, because we had this sort of 45-second Frost with Deathbringer that looked really fun and interesting. But, again, one of Frost's major issues is defense. And this talent right here, Rune Carved Plates, it's a stacking mitigation, which is perfect for Frost because it's not affected by dampening. You have to stay in the fight to stack it, which is exactly the kind of design that Frost needs. Whoever did this in the Frost tree, well done. you did an exceptional job on this. Promote that person. However, it has a massive PvP modifier on it, and one single proc from Rider of the Apocalypse gives you more defense than this stacking buff at max stacks. So even if Deathbringer did a lot of damage and was tuned correctly with Reaper's Mark, it's still, you'd get shredded so fast that you'd still have to run away. I think that one of the best things you could do for Frost is buff Rune Carve Plates with a positive, I know, don't get scared here, Blizzard, but a positive PvP modifier for Frost Death Knight with Rune Carve Plates. I think that would be exceptional, and it would sort of allow for the option of running a 45-second Frost. Death's Cold Embrace, again, it doubles down on the hit and run playstyle, because when you have an output PvP talent that is so substantial, it's almost mandatory in a lot of matchups. And if it's not, and you don't take it because, you know, people have so many outs and ways to get out of it, it feels really bad because all of your other damage isn't tuned competitively enough because it needs to make room for this massive output talent. So, candidly, I would remove this talent completely. The only other thing that you could maybe do is get rid of the 15-second penalty and ease up on some of the movement speed restrictions. Even nerf its damage a little bit when you do that, and I think it would still be fine. It may see play in some Battleground Blitz maps, but then in Arena, you can still safely choose other options because you'd have breathing room to buff the core kit. I think if this was addressed and some of the damage mitigation was addressed, Frost could be playing a very fun sort of shattering Deathbringer playstyle in PvP, and it would have a great time. Now, I know I threw a lot at you there, Blizzard, so I really want to make sure I am intentional with this. Please buff Frost's mitigation, not healing, but their mitigation. Buff their core kit. Things like Reaper's Mark could use a buff because they hit for less than a Killing Machine Obliterate right now. It's not, I don't know if that's tuned intentionally like that. Death's Cold Embrace needs either a rework or to be removed. It is not healthy for the game. It's not healthy for the Death Knight who's playing around this really cringy one-shot, and it's not healthy for the other team who is playing into a cringy one-shot. No one is enjoying it. And at the end of the day, you want people having fun playing your game. So that would be my recommendation for Frost PvP. All right, and one last thing I just want to mention before we wrap things up is, Blizzard, where's the pet customization? Where are you hiding it? Because I know that you talked about it after you made all the Warlock changes, that you were going to add it for other specializations. Where are you hiding it, man? Look, Death Knight has gone to the Shadowlands. We've gone to the mall. We've seen these cool undead in black domination armor, and we've gone to Maldraxxus where we've seen customizable ghouls. Blizzard, it's a free win. You're gonna make everyone so happy if you add some customization for Death Knights with their undead. I really would like to see that. To everyone else that's been watching, I appreciate you making it this far. I know it's been a long video. I really wanted to be intentional with this. If you like some of the ideas, please share them. The only way that Blizzard ever makes any change is if they get the feedback. So please share the feedback. Again, I appreciate you watching this whole thing, and leave a comment below if you have any other ideas or things that you would like to see. Thanks again, and see you soon.